Greetings, friends, and welcome to a astrological adventure. The lunar nodes are just about to change signs, the true lunar nodes changing tropical zodiac signs on January 18th, 2022. They've been in the signs North Node tropical Gemini, South Node Sagittarius since May of 2019, and that's the way for the nodes. They get around the zodiac and 18.618 years, some golden number action there, which I love. And they spend about 1.6 year per sign. And as I'm sure most of you know, the lunar nodes tend to travel around the zodiac in a retrograde motion. So we are moving from the Gemini Sagittarius axis of the tropical zodiac to the Taurus Scorpio axis. And I'm really excited to share some thoughts and be able to ask some questions with a great astrologer, Ari Moshe. We had spent some time in the Monterey Peninsula, I don't know, a couple months ago. And I just proposed this idea of like, hey, let's get together and have a jam. And yeah, I appreciate having so many of you here with us live. I would like to see this maybe after Ari and I exchange some ideas, like open up to more of a community discussion. So yeah, if you do have a question, raise your little Zoom hand and we'll get there. And I think at the end, maybe we'll find a way that we can have more of a community discussion. So Ari Moshe, how in the heavens are you?
Doing all right. Yeah, we just brought a piano into the house, so 90% of my heart is just excited about that, to play some music, and I'm grateful to get to hang out with you all today. And I don't know if everyone knows, the group that we've invited to join us live is a combination of what, Gemini, your students for this coming year, correct?
Yeah, I mean, right now my school is just starting, so people are not official students necessarily, but on the list of perhaps joining the school, and there'll be announcements about that just so folks who are interested know, like very soon, probably tonight, like just in time for Mercury's retrograde.
Great.
Yeah, and then students of Ari's school.
Students, yeah, I see many from this last year and a good handful from the upcoming program, so this is fun. My first time with many of you, so it's great to be together.
Yeah, and I think that it's really beautiful to have that cross-pollination, and I imagine that we'll have students that are engaging in both programs. I'm an eternal student of astrology myself. I love playing with many different paradigms. I think the lunar nodes are such an interesting study because what has been said about them has changed so dynamically over time, and they're utilized in different paradigms in different ways. And so it's something I'm always interested in talking with astrologers about, like, what do you do with the nodes? What do you do with nodal returns? I have my North Node in Scorpio, so I'll be personally going through a nodal reversal with the nodes here, North Node swimming through Taurus, my third nodal reversal. The first one happens when you're around 9 years old, and as things are with the nodes, then it's in an 18.6 year rhythm. So I'm excited to hear about that. And yeah, I mean, I think knowing where the nodes are in your chart and also knowing about where these locations of the signs of Taurus and Scorpio reside in your own chart can help you make this personal, of course, but we also want to tune into, you know, what does this mean for the world? I mean, anything in the heavenly happenings that symbolizes change right now, I am applauding for, because it has been a mess. But we also have to be careful what we wish for, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think at some point I'd like to tune into a little bit of what the nodes are astronomically. That's very true to my own astrology. I'm very interested in having that kind of embodied vision-based, eyes open wide view of the sky, so I can check in with the delineations and the poems of this astrological language. But I think maybe best to start with the language itself. So Ari Moshe, I would love for you to just speak in general to what you're feeling in this shift of the lunar nodes from Gemini Sagittarius to Taurus Scorpio, if that's okay, and I can riff off of that.
Okay, so yes, once again, hello everyone. I want to start by just providing a basic framework for understanding the meaning of the lunar nodes from an evolutionary perspective. I think it's very easy often to start speaking about things without really taking that step back to ask, what are these things about actually? So we can think of the lunar nodes. This is true whether we're looking at them natally or in transit, as the portal through which we are integrating everything that happens as a way that it informs a sense of self. Our experience of life right now and everything happening in our life, it's not seen or experienced in any objective way. There's no objective experiencer here. We're conditioned by the past. We're conditioned ways in which we've come to know ourselves, and thus the ways in which we have formed a sense of self. Our sense of self is that filter that we all have that allows us to look out at the world and say, okay, here's what's safe, here's what's not safe, here's what I'm comfortable with, here's a story that I've created about my life that is allowing me to have a particular kind of experience. And the way that I work with the nodes in the evolutionary astrology perspective, and just so everyone knows, I'm from the Jeffrey Wolf Green School of Evolutionary Astrology, so my teaching and my work is really inspired significantly from that particular lineage. So the way that I think of the nodes is as a part of the ongoing evolutionary journey. We as a soul, we as a timeless being, meaning we're not these personalities, we're not these bodies, our self, our nature, we're not inherently defined by any of these constructs that are a part of this human experience, but rather all of these constructs are relevant to our evolutionary growth for a time. And so the way that I think of the nodes is they're important symbols in reflecting the ongoing evolutionary journey. Our self-image becomes the vehicle. It becomes the way in which we play out human experience so that what? We can learn, we can figure out who we are. Fundamentally, everything points back to who do we think we are. And so our self-concept, our self-identity is that filter. But if we're just staying in one self-concept and one self-identity, there's never going to be any space within us to think differently. And it's the nature of identity that it inherently creates polarity. So if I know myself as, let's say, Scorpio South Node, if I've built an identity construct, if I've come to know myself in such a way where I'm really needing a depth of connection and experience, strong emotional, sexual needs, I'm highly triggered by certain people and things. I don't necessarily know why. I'm strongly craving certain people, things, and experiences. I don't necessarily know why. And I jump into it. There's entanglement, there's confusion, there's a lot of drama, but I learn, I grow, and it's really powerful. But if I'm just there, then the entirety of my life journey is going to be bound by strong cravings and aversions. I'm going to be knocked by the waves one way or another constantly. The way people treat me, the way people relate to me, everything will be the source of either my security or my insecurity. That's the issue potentially with Scorpio. We can get so identified and stuck in the way our circumstantial experiences is manifesting in such a way that it's either making me feel secure and good or not. And then we'll find all these manipulative ways. All right, I need to feel secure here. So here I'm going to entangle myself in these particular relationships and patterns to maintain my security. And that's why, Scorpio is marriage and divorce. We jump in, we're going to grow, we're going to learn more than what we've otherwise known through the commitment, through the marriage, and also divorce. Everything has to also at some point go. So the Scorpio identity structure can just be bound in this process of intensity, going in, going out, constantly dealing with the growth and the learning experiences that come with life. If we're only there, there won't be a ground for evolution, because the Taurus polarity fundamentally says there needs to be a still point within us, a reference point to our own soul growth that isn't defined or contingent upon the comings and the goings. So we learn through the nodal axis to also embrace the other node, the nodal polarity, in this case, Taurus. And if we develop Taurus as a whole skill set, there's a whole way of thinking, a filter of seeing reality. And as we try it on, the paradigm that we were living in has to change. Meaning if a Scorpio identity structure begins trying on some Taurus, there's a different way of thinking. There's a different way of seeing, right? What if I have a relationship to my senses, to the inner space? What would it look like for me to create an environment for myself, to create a container through which I can actually deepen in my own inner relationship to myself? What does it look like to develop continuity and tenacity and stability in my own life? So I'm cultivating a ground of strength and stillness in the midst of change. So every nodal axis can be understood in that general way. And I like to think of it as it's a way in which we're transcending the duality that's created by way of adhering to one extreme or another. And the idea isn't like you're leaving behind Scorpio or South Node and then moving towards the North Node. It's about integration. In fact, one common misunderstanding, very common misunderstanding within nodes, is that it's all about moving to the North Node. There are many cases where we can go so far into the North Node, not necessarily integrated, which will create a point where we're going to be catapulted back into the South Node. Right? With Scorpio Taurus, it can be the duality between isolation, being alone, hermiting yourself, being totally self-sufficient, and then a deep desire, a longing from within you that you don't even understand where it comes from, that impels you toward that next person, place, thing experience, right? And that tension between the nodal polarity and the Taurus Scorpio axis can very much be this tension between, I want to feel that everything is inside of me, that I need not create more complexity. I can be grounded and know myself from within. And the fact that we're all evolving, there are going to be desires. We're going to be impelled into experience. We're going to feel, oh, I want to pick up that book. That's not a bad thing, right? But there's a draw outward. We draw and, all right, we take that book, we bring it inward. Now it's back in the Taurus, right? It's now here. It's internalized. But we're going to find ourselves, Scorpio, drawn towards the outside. And not all of these desires necessarily are to be acted upon, or at least acted upon right away. Some of them can actually feel a little bit destabilizing. Oh, this is taboo. This is scary. This is actually not something I want to feel. Or I don't want to feel this resistance or this anger or this repulsion or this attraction. This doesn't fit into my relationship. This doesn't fit into my career. This doesn't fit into the world that I've known. And the whole of evolution is basically constantly bringing us to that edge relative to the Scorpio-Taurus axis, where we have to walk the path. We have to meet our desires. And there's a very important teaching with Scorpio. Desires are not something that the ego mind is creating. They're there and they point to a deeper psychology. They point to, on a soul level, on an essential level, the very places where we have yet to realize our power, our strength, our eternal self. It points to simply the edge of our evolutionary growth, the edge of our self-realization. You can't ignore the Scorpio realm and be like, no, it's all within. You have to meet it one way or another, whether it's acted upon or whether you engage in the outer world or not. The content that arises in our cravings and aversions, in our desires, it needs to be seen. It needs to be met with profound honesty. Honesty, in my view, is not just a Sagittarius thing. It's actually a Scorpio thing. We have to be fully honest and take full responsibility for everything arising within us and to see it through completely. This doesn't mean understanding it, nor does it mean controlling it. It means being honest about it. So that's a general introduction to my perspective on the nodal axis. You can see in the Scorpio-Taurus example, it's incredibly dynamic. We have to engage in the content. If you're a soul with the Scorpio-Taurus axis in your natal chart, that's your journey. In whatever nodal polarity you're looking at, whether it's the South Node in Scorpio, North Node in Scorpio, one way or another, it is that integration. We can call that integration the integration between life and death. You're here, you're in a body, and just a reminder to everyone to mute yourself so that we can keep me and Gemini in the main screen. You're here, you have a body, you're not the body, okay, we got that. Scorpio, you know, it all comes and goes. But for the time that you're here on the earth, there is a very true reality to food, water, shelter. We have the need to take care of our body. We have the need to make sure our basic survival needs and resources are established. And we need to thus have a certain level of self-value and self-esteem. Self-esteem says, okay, I want to live. I want to be here. I somehow regard my life as worthy. But then the Scorpio dimension says, but what's the point of life? Right? It's not just to like live and have pleasure and be comfortable, because if we're just there, the challenge with the Taurus polarity would be a total materialism. It's total identification with sensual experience, which means I don't want to feel bad and I want to feel good. Move away from what's uncomfortable and move towards what's comfortable. So that can simply be a life of, chocolate and avoidance. So the Scorpio dimension says, yes, you have to be here, but don't forget why we're here. Scorpio is the why. So we need to learn how to engage this life and actually take everything within and sustain our lives in a good way. Learn how to honor and value ourselves. Fundamentally recognize, Taurus, it all comes back to the inside. But then Scorpio says, there's content to work with. This body will go as well. Everything that you value, everything that's a source of pleasure, everything that feels comfortable will eventually go. It'll decompose. You'll lose it. It'll break. It'll die. And so we need to know ourselves on a much deeper level than just the gross sensual level of identity. So if you have that in your natal chart, that's your journey. I mean, that's going to talk to a personality structure that's potentially facing head on these core dynamics of life and death, having, letting go, wanting, but needing to also be stable and grounded within oneself. It's going to speak to all of these core soul lessons around sexuality, sharing, trust, self-reliance, but also if I do that too much, I might be hiding the fact that I don't trust. Opening up to intimacy, being vulnerable. Scorpio, we can't grow unless we also aren't willing to go into new experiences and face our deepest fears, face where we're not actually self-reliant or self-sufficient, where we don't know our power. There's a messiness. There's vulnerability. There can be a lot of movement between profound experiences of unity and profound experiences of disunity, stabilization and destabilization. And when we look at these nodal polarities moving in transit, so I'll say this, in transit, the nodal axis can be understood very much like we would understand the natal nodes. The only difference is they're moving through our chart, so they're not lifelong. The natal chart is a lifelong soul intention, and it's constantly interfacing with the template that's manifesting in our life at the time, right? So your life right now, the transits right now, these are the circumstances arising relative to your natal imprint. So the transiting nodes, wherever they're moving through each of our charts, that's where we are all evolving at the time in that part of our chart through the Scorpio-Taurus axis. So it doesn't matter if you don't have the Taurus-Scorpio axis, nodal axis in your natal chart. We all have it during this 1 year and 6 month period or so. So I'll speak a little bit to the meaning of the transiting nodes, in particular this nodal polarity. when you take the transiting nodes in the Taurus Scorpio axis and you put the South Node in Scorpio, we're dealing with content, South Node, that's emerging from the past. It's conditioned our present moment experiences, right? So the South Node in transit can speak to karmic dynamics that are coming up right now to be integrated, unfinished business. It can also speak to fruits that have been, that which has become fruitive, seeds that have been planted that have now come up to be harvested, right? So don't have any negative connotation with the South Node in transit. It's a mixed bag. There can be many gifts that are emerging right now because of past efforts, just as much as there can be unresolved dynamics that need to be seen and integrated. So what does that look like for Scorpio South Node? Desires. Fundamental, the essence of Scorpio is desire. Desire is the fuel of our life. Desire is the very thing that at the core, deepest level of our being, motivates us to have life experience. What are we going for? What are we wanting? Without a sense of wanting, there really wouldn't be a draw into time-space experience in the first place. And so the whole journey with desire is meeting whatever content is arising, playing it out, integrating it, and moving on. If we get stuck in the content of our desires, we can live an entire life or several lives sort of circulating around the same themes, the same issues. Oh, I trusted this person and they betrayed me. We'll recreate it. We'll recreate the same trust dynamics, the same betrayal situations, until we can really see it through, until we can really see what's the gem, what's the medicine, what's the teaching that I haven't quite grasped yet. And there's so much that we can delve into in terms of the deeper gift and the wisdom that we can learn through the Scorpio experience. But at the core, it's really fundamentally coming back to, where is my own evolution? One of the things that I so appreciate about Jeff Green's teachings is he always points us back to, it fundamentally comes back to, are we going to cooperate or resist evolutionary imperative? Evolutionary law, evolutionary imperative is a Scorpio thing. It means evolution has to happen. In the same way that everything has to decompose, everything has to move on. Are we going to resist it? And resistance takes the stance of holding on to whatever identity structure, whatever story keeps us in the struggle. And we could have an experience with Scorpio where we don't know how to let go. We don't know how to find our power. We don't have the psychological depth of self-awareness yet to fully see what it is that needs to be seen. So it can be incredibly uncomfortable. It's kind of like, two examples that come to mind on this level is, having a sugar addiction, knowing that you have that addiction, or any addiction, not knowing how to stop it, but being almost possessed by it, or being possessed by these really strong feelings of anger, not knowing how to go beyond it, but just feeling totally possessed by it. It's there. You go to sleep, it's in your mind. You wake up, it's in your mind. You might forget about it, but it's still there. And it's like, how do I move beyond that? How do we get beyond that? Another example would be like walking outside and just feeling like there's an itch. You don't know where it's coming from. It's itching, but you don't know how to scratch it. It's like something is itching. It's around here somewhere, and I can't quite seem to get it to go away. It consumes our consciousness. And a part of what that does is it invites us fundamentally via the discomfort of the itch, the discomfort of the emotion, of the addiction, of the possession. It invites us to say, okay, this is bigger than what I understand. This is bigger than all of my efforts to control. This is bigger than everything that I've known how to do with my existing skill set, and that's true. It's bigger because we haven't evolved to the point where we know ourselves yet in the ways that we will. So there's a profound humility in facing that which we haven't yet moved beyond. And that's where we can move into that Taurus polarity. What does the Taurus North Node say here? this present moment, this breath. Are you cold? Are you warm? Are you hungry? Do you have the money that you need? Do you have the resources that you need? Are you taking care of life? If you think of the analogy of a garden, Taurus is gardening. What does your garden need? Right? And we can get so consumed, so wrapped up in the weeds or in the overgrowth of the invasive species, which can be a Scorpio thing, right? Or we don't have enough land, or our neighbor stole all the land from us, or whatever dynamics that are keeping us from just tending to the garden. It's a very present moment thing. And I think that, of course, there are so many dimensions that we can unpack here, and maybe we'll get to do that as we engage this conversation. But it really says there is life to tend to in this present moment. We all have our work to do. Scorpio doesn't necessarily want to do that work from the point of view of getting stuck in the muck. It's so invested in the struggle. But Taurus says, no, you have your, not my life, your garden, your responsibility to tend to it, to care for it. And there's a joy in that. There's a simplicity that can be found in the Taurus energy that says, I am here now and I'm responsible for where I direct my attention right now. So as we embrace the transiting North Node, it becomes a moment-to-moment lead point for integration, for conscious evolution. And again, the nodal axis is really all about self-identity, who we think we are. So our willingness to evolve at any particular moment in time is going to manifest itself via a willingness to integrate the North Node point, which fundamentally says, I'm willing to slow down. I'm willing to look inside. I'm willing to settle into a deeper place of comfort within my own self. That's a basic way of understanding this nodal polarity. The nodes in general, and this particular nodal polarity. And I'll say two more things in this little section here before I finish this little talk. There are certain nodal polarities that have they all have different flavors. The Scorpio-Taurus nodal polarity, of course, has a very particular flavor. You can call it the flavor of intensity, the flavor of everything's really important and immediate, right? It's like life and death. Fundamental life decisions, because we're dealing with life, we're dealing with evolution. In a sense, the Taurus Scorpio axis can feel very important, very intense, whereas Gemini Sag is more philosophical, intellectual, your belief system, your outlook, your understanding of life. Are people going to understand you during Thanksgiving dinner? Are you going to get into an argument with your uncle? Like, there's a different dimension of experience in the Gemini Sag, which is important. It very much speaks to our interpretation of phenomenal reality, how we understand the meaning of life in many ways, our willingness to learn and to be open to new experience and data. Taurus Scorpio says, are you going to do your evolutionary work? Are we going to take responsibility for the content that is present for us now? We'll speak later on about some of the transits that are happening that are profound this year. In particular, Uranus on the North Node, Saturn square in the nodal axis throughout the most of this year. I'm very excited to speak about that. But the flavor of this axis is there's work to do. It really emphasizes an intensity of self-knowledge. So the other thing is Scorpio and Taurus, they're fixed signs. The fixed signs in the zodiac, they're all the center of their respective quadrants. The nature of all the fixed signs is where consciousness becomes centralized. It goes within. So Scorpio is fixed water, right? It's emotion. It's the power and the potency of desire that comes from the soul. There's a depth of emotion that is beyond our ability to consciously locate and understand it. We're going to feel and not necessarily know where it's coming from. There's an immensity of subconscious content in Scorpio emanating from the soul itself, and not all of us are fully self-aware of who we are as a soul. Meaning, to speak of the soul, it's who we are. We are soul. But to the extent that we're identified with the temporal facets of our life, there's going to be subconscious content and triggers and emotions and desires coming through that we need to face. Fixed water. And then fix earth. I don't care what's going on. I'm going to sit right here. I don't care what's going on in the morning. I'm going to do my practices. I don't care what's going on. I'm going to keep my blood sugar as stable as possible. And blood sugar issues, Scorpio, Taurus. I'm going to keep my blood sugar stable. I'm not going to allow the psychological content to seem so real and important that I actually hurt myself. So these are some introductory thoughts from the evolutionary perspective looking at this axis, and we'll share more later as we jam. So to you, Gemini.
Right on. Thank you so much. Brilliant. I'm actually going to start by addressing a question that just came in, which is, what do you make of astrology texts removing the distinction between nodal signs and associated house placements? How do you approach that? I find the sign and house distinctions to be important. North Node in Taurus in the 7th house, for example, is not the same as North Node in the 2nd house in Libra. And do you agree with this? I do 100%. I mean, I'm consistently on an adventure of trying to release the grip that sometimes exists between signs and houses in modern astrology. Right? Like the idea that Taurus is the 2nd house. I'm Gemini rising. That's not true for me. Taurus is on my 12th. And I would say, you know, as you advance in your astrological understanding, look first in your own life for where these nodes will be transiting your nativity, right? So look for me, it's like 12th house North Node transit now, 6th house South Node transit. That being said, Earth has houses too. And one of the old words for the tropical signs actually is the terrestrial houses. It's a very confusing thing when you start studying traditional astrology, because signs were called houses, and houses as we know them today were called places. So we encounter that if you do research and start reading some of the Hellenistic astrology, just know that going, and it can be really helpful. It's like, what are they talking about? What do they mean, like the house of Taurus? But it was a very different approach, I think, than what we hear today. And a lot of traditional students are very fixated on a Cancer rising map, the Thema Mundi, whereas modern astrology is often looking at this Aries rising map. Now, there's an astronomical heart behind both, and behind any 12 versions, right? Based upon your rising sign. For me, that's Gemini. The Aries point, the cusp of Pisces and Aries in the tropical zodiac, literally is due east from the center of the earth, and it works like a global ascendant for that reason. That's why we have, you know, a turning of the ages astronomically indicated by precession of the equinoxes. And while that's kind of an advanced topic, it's one that I really suggest you deepen into if you want to understand more of the whispers of the mysteries of the nodal movement or any retrograde movement. It's genius to know that these nodes will shift signs in the retrograde direction as they do, while Venus is retrograde, especially with the North Node moving to Taurus and moving to Taurus from Gemini with Mercury retrograde as well, right? There's like, I think, a little additional effort in helping us understand and maybe even reverse our view as we move through the zodiacal order backwards. You know, it's, I was just speaking yesterday to a woman who's developing like a learning tool of planets and houses and signs, and we were talking about randomizing it, right? So it looks like this kind of slot machine, and you pull the thing and then it ends up with just a planet and a sign and a house. We often get stuck in these, I don't want to call it a rut, but like, I'm learning Aries, I'm learning Taurus, I'm learning Gemini, I'm learning Cancer. And the way that if we just follow the moon's movement through the heavens, for example, we see that zodiacal order speak. If we sit on a chair and gaze at the midheaven and just literally throughout the course of the night watch the signs in the zodiacal order, right? Like there's truth, but also as we open to different groups of signs and the polarities or the triplicities or the quadruplicities, which is such an important thing with the nodes, we loosen our kind of one route through the zodiac from zodiacal order, and we get to play in many different ways. Our natal charts and other natal charts obviously help us do that as well. So there's a beautiful invitation for every time the nodes switch signs to contemplate, what if the zodiac went the other way? Right? So there's a lot of great questions that help us understand how the second bursts the third. Or I like to think of the tropical signs, the terrestrial houses, literally as Earth's houses. And in that regard, the second is Taurus for our mother, for the planet, and that's where our bones are her stones. That being said, I'm going to begin my investigations of my own life with this nodal shift in a 12th, 6th way, because I'm Gemini rising and that's where they're going. And very importantly, where the nodes go, so go eclipses, right? So the eclipse activations, as they retrograde their way through your nativity or through that of your loved ones, right? This is something to track in the great cycles also. But if we tune into this idea of secondness and thirdness, right? I think like a wonderful question for me, the most powerful question is, why did you speak your first word? Or why did you make your first sound? Now that's pretty early on, right? And many of you here are mothers. And so you've gotten to witness this from the other side as well. Right? So why does baby cry? It's a maddening question when we don't know the answer, right? And it's like, oh, like, how can I fix this? It's like immediately, like, what do you need? So I love that Ari was speaking about needs, because I think that is like I always ask students to contemplate axes, right? So hot and cold are two sides of one thing called temperature. Now, you're not going to convince hot that it is cold, but it is, right? It is temperature. They are temperature. They are the extremes of that thing, right? Questions like, what is the one thing that Aries and Libra are the two sides of? What is the one thing that Taurus and Scorpio are the two sides of? Now, there's many answers, okay? And this isn't about right or wrong, but I think one of these things like embodiment, incarnation, and needs is a huge piece of that, right? Whether we're talking about actual physical needs, like even to the rudimentary point of food and water and air, right? Touch, sensuality, aliveness. But that place that really brings us here, a need to grow, can live there. So this question of, why did you first speak? And when? I mean, what qualifies as speech? Why did you first think? Why did you first engage with higher thought, as you all have, and perhaps not all do, with self-reflection? You know, why do we ask why? That's another on the other side of the axis, where I usually find that I've learned to ask why because things die. When something's taken away, when we lose something, when the heart breaks, right? And that feels more kind of alive in the Scorpio zone. Scorpio, in many regards, is most present when there are two, right? Just as Libra is. And when things die, we ask why. And that is the great password that helps us enter the Sagittarius Mystery School. So it's a little easier in that direction, right? I can say that baby cries because baby needs, right? And it might be, I need food. I mean, it is an amazing truth that we incarnate into vessels that will not survive on their own. It's a profound truth, right? This isn't true, as we know, for all animals. And for those that it is, typically it's a much shorter necessity than it is for the human being. Why in the spiritual design, where I would say the human experience offers the potential for a spiritual awakening, why does this necessitate a beginning where one cannot survive on their own? Because we know that our relational entanglements or resistance of has so much to do with high curriculum here in the Earth game. And that's not true for everyone, right? This is something where we get to see in our own natal charts where the focuses lie. But I think when we're just entertaining Taurus, Scorpio, Gemini, Sagittarius by signs, these are really good questions. Why did I first speak? Why did I first ask? Right? Like, why did I first tell and why did I first ask? And if I look at why, what is the one thing that Gemini and Sagittarius are the two sides of? And again, there are infinite questions. A good answer for each of these is love, but one is truth. So our needs themselves give rise to, the reaction to our needs is communication. Right? Baby needs food, baby cries to be fed. And sometimes mother rushes in, but the baby's actually screaming, change me, and wondering why you keep shoving that thing in my face. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, that psychic connection between mother and child that develops. For some, we see more natural, for others take some time. It is one of the most beautiful and profound teachers available to us. So not of us, all of us will have the opportunity to receive that teaching experientially. I should be careful and not just say mothers, though given chordal connection and whatnot, that psychic opportunity is a little bit more facilitated through sharing biology in that regard, you know. But there is so much teaching in that. And it brings me also into the truth that while yes, Gemini Sagittarius is an axis, it is also part of a cross. So the nodes also tune us, and as Ari was speaking into, not only of these axes, right, but also into these crosses. So a very important truth of this nodal shift is not only from the axis of Gemini Sagittarius to Taurus Scorpio, but from mutable to fixed. Right? That is like literally changing worlds. So it's an amazing truth that these things, in a sense, happen gradually, right? And there's like the idea of cusps in astrology is this wonderful animal to pet, right? Like in some cosmologies, there's just this smooth dial. And the last bit of Scorpio is the first bit of Sagittarius in that. And in older tradition, it's like, it clicks and you're jumping a wall. And in that case, you're moving from a place that speaks the language of Mars to a place that speaks the language of Jupiter, and from water to fire, and fixed and mutable, and everything shifts. Now, when you watch the moon do that, it's not like she disappears. She just grows a little bit or shrinks a little bit, depending on where the sun currently lives, you know? So it's a really interesting trip to look at kind of older astrology, which is very dodecagonal, very like hard ridges, versus modern astrology, which is, I think, more cyclical and smooth and curvy. And I think both of these realities or cosmologies have their place. So will this be a smooth transition or a hard shift? Now, I can just say that my need to speak is born in my need to survive. My why is born in the experience of death and loss. But what if I turn these around? What survival needs are born through communication or speech? Or I think much more importantly, truth. right? And especially given the madness of our times, regardless of what we think of it, the truth is we are not getting truth, right? And so I don't want to like politicize this thing, but the amount of censorship that blossomed during this time of the nodal transit through this axis of Gemini Sagittarius is incredibly telling. And if you rewind, and this is one of the beautiful truths of our craft, right? We want astrology as a way in, not as a way out. We want even our quest into the past to try to understand, not as something to escape now, or our quest for what's going to come and journey into the future, not as an escape of the now, but in this understanding of cycles, reaching into the past, reaching into the future to like be more strongly planted here in the soil of this moment. I mean, I think Ari Moshe just very beautifully spoke to that truth of North Node Taurus. If we only said, what do you want of me, to that one being, good, embody, be here now, right? But it's also very hard to be here now when you're concerned with or being forced to comply with this rule or that, right? It's really hard to be present with needs, desires, when the freedoms you once had to explore those needs and desires are not present for you anymore. Now, that gets into privilege and all sorts of really interesting truths, which is also part of this now. And I think in the Gemini Sagittarius reality, we can travel without moving. And I think that's been part of the imperative or the impetus or the invitation of lockdowns during that time. But now in Taurus Scorpio, you know, I want something I can eat, not just the thought of it. I want somebody to, you know, massage that knot in my back, not just like studying the philosophy of massage, right? Like it wants to get fucking real in a huge way, right? And it's going to be really interesting. There's a huge kind of like rubber hits the road thing happening, I believe, with this nodal shift. For me personally, there's been a lot of adventure. And again, I'm Gemini rising, so the North Node crossed my ascendant not too long ago. It's been like part of that nodal journey through the axis of Sag. In Gemini, for me, it's like first, seventh, relational and those things. But part of it is like, who am I if I don't have data? If I don't have truth? I'm so committed to learning. Who am I if I have to surrender to the truth that I'm not going to solve this problem like a series of mathematical equations? Who am I if I'm forced to release my need to know, right? Or my need to speak clearly? Like for me, so much of my own personal pain during this nodal transit through Gemini Sagittarius has been self-censorship, because I have always connected most with people since I've stopped hiding who I am and sharing my words. And while that might scare folks away that I'm probably not meant to dance with long term, it really calls your crew around, you know? So while I'm not trying to celebrate self-censorship, like that's a mess, I also came to terms with, wait a second, two things. One, if I'm no longer able to connect with anyone in this like adventure of authenticity, then what good can I do? Because while I might not be able to have the reach and speak my quote unquote truth to like a wider audience like I used to do with less concern, I spend time really diving deep. And as the ways of the world get more and more ridiculous, like that venue of personal connection and counseling session, friendship, whatever it may be, just widens in these beautiful ways. Two, I've really had the opportunity in this last year to sit and wait and kind of investigate where somebody's at and forced to address the assumptions, right? That's been an interesting thing for me in astrology in general, this like immature slash, I mean, I guess narcissistic idea that because I've gone through this thing that's brought me to astrology, then other people must have gone through some similar thing to get to astrology, which is just ridiculous, right? I mean, I remember that like deception coming crashing down when I first got to an astrology conference and was so excited to meet other people who like us are like geeking out on this amazing thing. And then just so shocked that it seemed in some ways like the only thing that we were in alignment around. And that is actually a beautiful diamond, right? Like not something bad or heavy, but you have to realign your definitions. And I think that the journey of the nodes through Gemini Sagittarius in many regards has been about that. So it's not just what truths are available or not available to you, but what is truth? And that for me has been reshaped, retrograded, right? Now, when I look retrograde through the zodiac, again, I can say just on a very fundamental basis, the way that the third is born in reaction to the second is I have needs, therefore I must speak. Like, or let me say it this way, I have needs that require something outside of me for my survival or fulfillment. And therefore I must speak. And by the way, that first speech is not meant or tuned to be concerned with the other's needs. That it gives birth to that, right? That's how the fifth of the third is the seventh. The fifth is the child of the third is the seventh. You see? Because as I'm speaking, as I'm crying to mother at 3 in the morning and she doesn't want to wake up to give me the milk, I might learn pretty quickly actually that milk at 10 a.m. tastes better because she's not angry and she has needs too, right? So I mean, the third quickly gives birth to the seventh and the seventh to the 11th and the 11th to the third. And I'm going a little too far, but that essence of seeing how the houses themselves or the signs themselves connect with one another, feed one another, that kind of thing, right? On a whole nother level, each sign is born as a reaction to the sign that precedes us to keep us on the wheel of life. Pisces had its way, we would never incarnate. Right? I ask that being all the time, why am I here? They say to get back to source. And why the fuck did I come? Do you know what I mean? Like the necessary reaction to oneness is individuation. But it also wounds the need for connection to the all. Right? And you'll see this. This is one of the great teachings of polarity. And we don't have charge without the negative and the positive sides and the poles, right? So we get that more in sign to sign. And it's really interesting to see how that works. Like if I want then to individuate and do it alone, well, so sorry, the spaceship needs fuel. If I therefore embrace that truth and decide to speak these needs that I have, I'm forced to also understand eventually I'm not the only one. And there's so much opportunity for our contemplations, like literally just following the sun. Speed it up, follow the moon. You will never see them retrograde. Right? You will never see the seasons go in reverse. And yet we get these little blasts, right? Sometimes it snows in April, Prince sings. And, you know, so I would really encourage you to just contemplate what would happen if we experience time with the clock like stuck in rewind. And like what needs are born from truth or lack of truth versus what truths are born from need. Do you feel me? And I think that these are the contemplations that will open a very like kind of natural understanding in the language of your own particular genius that dance to this. Now, I do want to just share a little bit. I'm not going to go through a gazillion slides here, but this to me was one of my, like one of the most important sky experiences I've had recently. This is the moon and Jupiter. And I think I'll tell you why as we go along. You know what? I'm just going to like fast forward through much of this and let the pretty pictures do the talking. Syzygy is an alignment of any three things, usually reserved astronomically for alignments of Earth, Moon, and Sun. And, you know, this perhaps is the most amazing version of those. Ari and I were actually together the first time I experienced a diamond ring, a total solar eclipse in the sky in 2017. 108 is this really brilliant Earth, Moon, Sun number that we can play with another time. It's seen in some of the greatest eclipse myths or transmissions of ancient sacred knowing. 400, another fun one too. And the way that this works is that Earth and experiences Moon and Sun appearing to be the same size in our sky, because while Sun is 400 times further away, it's 400 times larger than Moon by diameter. For me, this 400 is much better expressed this way. Because in astrology, we learn to contemplate the cross of matter and the crescent of soul and the circle of spirit. And that's really become a profound teacher to me. And I think North Node in Taurus, more astronomy, more geometry, these are sister sciences of our cosmic craft, right? I will say that this is how spirit and soul give birth to matter itself. There's so much to say just about the actual route of incarnation into this place and the human eye and the emergence from mother's womb. And there's like a lot of these things I will share another time, at least in my Earthstrology school, and Diana and Apollo, moon and sun, born from a mother who was on the run from a dragon. It's one of many, many eclipse stories from around the world of serpents and dragons and the decapitated one and the dragons that eat the moon or the sun. And, you know, this is Rahu and Ketu and some of the ancient traditions. I'm going to speak to them in a chart since we are students of astrology. This is an image not of a total solar eclipse or annular, which is shown, but rather a partial solar eclipse, the one that next aligns in May of this year in the sign of Taurus. And we can tell this on a chart. Why? Because moon and sun meet near a node. The nodes basically symbolically come from the king cobra's head and also the slithering of the serpent. And there's really important reasons why, and this is why we have so much dragon and serpent in the old myths. The nodes themselves are circle of spirit and crescent of soul. So you hear them often taught like headphones or horseshoes, which gets me down. I really love to show the North Node this way because there's one sun and one moon, and you need both nodes to kind of complete the wave. Because what's happening every month is that the moon snakes above and below the path of the sun, which we call the ecliptic plane, right? It's the heart of the zodiac. So I'll just show you using this wonderful program solar system scope. This is a time when the moon has what we call northern latitude. It is north of the ecliptic plane, here shown in yellow, although it'll think maybe turn to purple. No, that's moon crossing the south node, the north node, getting up north. descending south across the ecliptic, right? Like this is what happens at the lunar nodes from an astronomical point of view. And we can learn so much about this. So I'm going to go geocentric, like our charts, Earth in the center, the path of the sun is the ecliptic plane, which I'm fond of calling the circle of spirit because it's where sun lives. The moon has a different trip, right? So I like to call the moon's path the circle of soul. And these paths cross at the lunar nodes. They diverge by about 5 degrees in our sky. Where the moon crosses the sun's path from the south to the north is the north node. And square to that place is the northern bending, where moon is most north of the ecliptic. Where the moon crosses in her monthly orbit from north to south of the ecliptic or the zodiac, that is the south node. And then squaring the nodes on that southern side, we say is the southern bending. So it's really helpful to kind of think of the ecliptic like this and just see the moon snaking above and below, crossing at the nodes. So one of the ways to contemplate the nodes in general, these are these sacred places where the moon and the sun become one. So what does that mean? It very much depends on what you feel the moon is and what the sun is. And there are many ways to pet the cosmic cat. There are many paradigms. For me, I teach moon as soul and sun as spirit. That's obviously going to differentiate from like Jeffrey Wolf Green's teachings, where Pluto speaks a little bit more to the soul. Although, and it's like a maybe fun place for a conversation today or another time, I love to say that like Pluto and like the Pluto Charon experience, that's Pluto's primary moon, they're like the Earth moon situation times 8, right? Like there's a really interesting astronomical resonance between those two realms. So why do I say this is like such an important experience for me? I mean, first of all, this is like the first time I saw the sky in weeks because it's been super cloudy and rainy here in Northern California. I mean, thank God we've needed it. But it hurts me when the sky shuts down. It's like why I left Seattle. It's hard. Like this looks like the sun here, but that's actually the moon. Okay. The idea is when I open up the camera enough to really see Jupiter here, the moon gets blown out. And so just dropping that crescent in there. So why is this important? I want to show you the chart in this moment. And what you see is moon exactly conjoined Jupiter, right? I mean, to the arc minute. And this is the moment I took this photo from this place that the chart is cast for, okay? So this is moon, Jupiter in the 7th house on their way to go set in the west. Why is moon not occulting Jupiter? Why is moon not right in front of Jupiter? Why is moon not hiding Jupiter from our eyes? And the answer is what we call celestial latitude. Notice that the moon is square her nodes. Do you see that in the chart? And where the moon crosses the ecliptic from the north to the south is the south node. And then square that point, she reaches her southern bending. This is why moon appears to be so far below. I'm in the northern hemisphere, so that southernness looks low, looks down. So an important thing, and the reason why I wanted to bring your attention here is because as these nodes shift from Gemini Sag retrograde to Taurus Scorpio, so the bending shift too. In this recent adventure with quote unquote truth and censorship that we've really been experiencing over the last year and a half, I feel so much of that as I've been seeing it in the timing, so much of it has been tied to Pisces. Why? Because when the South Node is in Sag, North Node is in Gemini, the Southern bending is in Pisces, the Northern bending is in Virgo. So what happens is while the Sag Gemini are the places of moon crossing the sun's path, Virgo is where moon is like highest up, furthest away, like individuated. Okay. Now in the Southern hemisphere, this thing changes, and that's a really important conversation. I want to honor that we have a couple of friends here from the Southern hemisphere right now. There's a very important truth, which is that Earth is moving north through space. And while I don't have time to dive into that today, it is an astronomical support for the reason why the tropical zodiac works in both hemispheres, despite some strange reversals like seasonal energies. And we used to call the North Node the ascending node because it does ascend in the Northern hemisphere, but it descends in the Southern hemisphere. And it's just too long of a tail. But hopefully, I wanted to share that so you can take my word for it, that there is something when the North Node is in Gemini that Virgo is like exalted. Well, one of the ways that happens, and what I would consider a shadow aspect, is people are spraying fucking hand sanitizer all over the place. Do you know what I mean? And washing their hands until their skin is gone. Pardon my language, but it's like crazy. I mean, I had a neighbor, I watched them receive a package some months ago, and they like were out there spraying a box for about half an hour. And this like cultish, almost ritual that had opened up for them in this interesting time. And it was like, whoa, that's like this Virgo overload, what's going on there. And I see that in northern bending. Okay. Meanwhile, there's something about Pisces coming down to Earth, right? Compassion has been the key. But I will also say personally, and maybe this is showing too many of my own thought cards, but like manipulated compassion, perhaps even misguided compassion. Now, you can't have compassion without passion, and that's part of the important teachings of Scorpio and the Taurus Scorpio axis. The last thing I want to say before passing the ball is know as well that while the North Node heads to Taurus and the South Node to Scorpio, the northern bending will move to Leo and the southern bending to Aquarius. So like Ari is going to speak with us about Saturn at that bending, that square to the lunar nodes, right? And it's interesting to see that just in this time of the nodal shift, Jupiter was at that bending place. That's why I was so excited to have that opportunity to see Moon conjoin Jupiter. I've been watching that all year, but that was the kind of the ultimate one. People say that you can't see the nodes because the truth is there's no astronomical body there. They do not reflect light. But if you learn to see the zodiac in the sky, and you can simply by learning the ecliptic stars, you will see every month the moon crossing the zodiac. That's what a node is. And you will see at times these super strange things like, whoa, that's an exact conjunction between Moon and Jupiter, and they're so far apart. And you start to learn to see these bendings, these square to the nodes. You understand there's something stranger. So there's this whole trip that people teach about the reason why the ancients knew about the nodes is because they were watching eclipses. Like if you study eclipses, you don't have the opportunity enough. All you need to do is learn to see the ecliptic in the sky. And I sure hope you will, especially in this North Node Taurus time, because it helps you bring this cosmic energy down to Earth, right into the body. So the last thing I would say, or just ask you to contemplate in participation with this nodal shift of what is it to take Leo now and put it on high, right? I mean, I spoke of like, for me, which is like a challenging example of too much Virgo of a neighbor spraying a box. But what is the beauty of taking Virgo and exalting, right? Like Ari Moshe is a being like this to me. Like I really respect his attention to his practice. For me, that's like a Virgo place. What is the beautiful truth of bringing Leo and exalting it? Now, if we exalt, shadow side of Leo, like it's going to be a scary thing to see, and we'll see a good amount of it. But what about putting honor in its righteous place, in its righteous throne? And what about Aquarius? See, Aquarius is coming down to the ground. And what do we need now but change? But what is it when Aquarius like falls out? What are the potential Aquarian manipulations? That I think is one of the most important questions right now. And that will bring me full circle retrograde back to where I began, which is that the lunar nodes retrograde motion help us also tune into the great year, the Platonic year, the 26,000 year turning of the ages, and this movement now from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And that's happening, as we know, not with the nodes. That time will come once again, as it does every 18 and a half years, but rather with the bendings at this time. So hopefully that's not too much astronomy. And hopefully that will add a few more elements. And so the other piece, and I'll just like retrograde back to one thing that Ari Moshe was saying, is like, we're very used to cardinal becomes fixed, becomes mutable, becomes cardinal. What is it for fixed to go, backwards to, or sorry, mutable to go backwards to fixed? And there are endless contemplations there. And the more that we answer questions by asking questions, the more we offer opportunity for the answers to come into the language of your own genius. Trust that.
Beautiful. I have a question for you. We were chatting about this and you sort of just mentioned it. I'm curious, what are the motions that naturally move retrograde as their mean motion? So we have the nodes of the moon, the precession of the equinox, which is that 26,000 year cycle. What else? Are there any other cycles?
Yeah, so it's cool, like a lot of greater cycles. So the Venus star.
That's right. That's what it is.
And this is a really important year for that conversation, because on October 22nd, when Venus aligns behind the sun, right, the exterior conjunction, it will be the first Venus-Sun conjunction in the sign of Libra in our lifetimes. And that star point has been hosted by the sign of tropical Scorpio for more than 100 years. And so, I mean, if we use some of the older images of Scorpio as a Martian place, this is an interesting homecoming or return to a home Libra from a Martian zone for the Venus star. Interestingly, the 5 archetypes that Venus has been painting for us in time have been Gemini and Leo, but also these 3 signs traditionally associated with Mars: Aries, Scorpio, and Capricorn, where Mars traditionally is said to be exalted, right? And in our lives, stay alive, everyone, the Scorpio star point is now becoming Libra, and the Aries star point is now becoming Pisces, of course, a sign where Venus is said to be exalted. And eventually, just like these nodes travel retrograde, the Gemini Venus star point, which was last blessed in June of last year, will become Taurus. Most of us will be alive to experience those shifts. So just through resonance with signs, it's an amazing kind of move back to Venusian place. It's intriguing to see that like a lot of kind of the Martian energies happened with one of the most beautiful movements of the suffrage movement and women's right to vote and all that. Okay. Also the Mercury star. Now the Mercury star is a little bit more of a geometric oddity, as Mercury would cause us to expect. But in general, there's kind of a 6-pointed star thing that Mercury does. Mercury has pi cycles every year. And in those cycles, like Venus, Mercury comes between Earth and the sun. That happens in the middle of the retrograde. So we've got one coming soon in Aquarius, and then Mercury will go behind the sun. And that whole star has what I call a meta retrograde. It's much faster than Venus is. But you will find, and there's a really wonderful text to read about this, which is Gary Caton's Mercury Elemental Year, that if you look at the Mercury retrogrades, they will be hosted in the same element, typically for a year, usually 4 or 6 Mercury cycles in the same element, and then they will retrograde back. So we've been doing air signs in 2021, air signs in 2022, and then that too will move back retrograde from the air to the earth. So those are other things that really having me like celebrate this intriguing truth that this retrograde movement of the nodes from the Gemini Sagittarius axis back to the Taurus Scorpio axis happened with Venus and Mercury both retrograde at the same time.
That's really cool. And I really appreciate that prompting to just hold a spaciousness and asking, what does it mean for any cycle to be moving retrograde? And there's so much conditioning around the direct motion of the zodiac. You know, Aries does feel like it intuitively moves into Taurus, which moves into Gemini. And most of the education that we learn really just focuses on that. But there is reality to this retrograde motion. So I was just thinking of one thing, you know, coming from the nodal axis in Gemini Sag, which has so much to do with the expansion of knowledge, sharing of information, of course, all the confusion around what's true, what's factual, data, fact versus opinion, beliefs versus actual knowledge. It's very much in the intellectual, conceptual, philosophical realm. To move from that axis into the Scorpio-Taurus axis, it's like I almost have this palpable sense of none of that matters anymore. Like there's you know, there's real stuff to deal with. And I think so much of the Scorpio-Taurus axis speaks to the draw of this human, emotional, biological, psychological life. How are we connecting with each other? How are we actually sharing and depending and building these bonds between one another? How are we living and surviving and choosing to ground ourselves? What are our values? How are we living them? Like, we can talk about it so much, write articles, share a YouTube video, have conversations, but that Scorpio Taurus is how are you living it? It's fixed. It actually wants us to, it invites a certain level of self-knowledge and self-definition. So I just appreciate being in that mindset of thinking of the progression of the zodiac, but backwards, and seeing the validity in it as well.
Right. I love that. For one thing, it was like, it's like a really dodecagonal, rather circular response, right? It's like philosophy doesn't matter. We're like, this is real. And, you know, I mean, it's true, right? Like when, you know, when the world catches on fire and you got to get away, right? And you maybe need to save a few precious things, obviously starting with the baby at your house, right? How much happened? Like, do you grab the guitar? Do you grab something that will let you work when you're, you know, running from the flames or whatever? But so much of that, and we want to have our planning done ahead of time, right? So it's just easy to make your moves, because if you sit there and think about it, like, you're going to pay, right? And so there's something
important.
You're right, in this axis, that it's like, it's what's important here on earth in the body, not like what we think is important, and including that thought is important. And there's a more circular way. I mean, when we look in the forward direction, I always love to see, and this is really echoed in the astronomy, right? Because like the sun, I have a hill right here I call Solstice Hill, because it's where the sun, every day between summer solstice, or June solstice, I should say, and December solstice, it's getting further and further and further south. And then it hits that edge of the Tropic of Capricorn, and on the greatest adventure. And Capricorn's like, no, like, that's far enough. Thank you very much. Like, you know, back to the tribe. Or on the other side, like Gemini's like, what, who, when was, and Cancer's like, bring it back home. Like, like too far, right? And so seeing those kind of like bounds, but like, there's a very clear, I think, container for the Gemini Sagittarius regard in those solstice signs of Cancer and Capricorn. When we're reversing it and going the other way, it's interesting, because Taurus and Scorpio, they're just they're not containers as much, but and I don't want to say they're less opinionated, because that's a silly thing to say, right? but they're less opinionated. It's like, it's a different set of rules. There's a different reason why they would react, right? And it is, it's just like, it's like, well, you can't have sex with words. I mean, Gemini would argue, right? But you know, like, it's not real enough. It's not that it's taking you too far away from your responsibilities, and you know, it just doesn't matter. It's not matter, right? And I think that I'll just share this weird example. I was really entertaining a lot of flat Earth folks some years ago.
Be right back. Keep on talking.
No worries. And I was really intrigued by it. There were people, and maybe you know some of them in my circles, who were really adamant about the idea that we've been lied to about the Earth being a sphere, and all the NASA images are fakes. And if you look out there, the Earth certainly seems flat. And I mean, there's like some really interesting and cool arguments in that space if you're willing to go there. And I really try to release my beliefs. That whole thing for me was a really important opportunity for me to realize, like, oh my gosh, like, not only am I religious, but I'm like a priest of this religion. Like, I'm always talking about spinning Earths and orbiting Earths, and how do I know? And I mean, there are things that I've seen with my own eyes which necessitate like globe reality. But anyway, so I was there, and the reason why I'm sharing this story is my friend Carrie wrote to me at one point. Is like, dude, you're like coming into Uranus opposition, and what happens at that time is you move from I'm going to do all these things. So, oh my God, there's so many things I'm not going to be able to do in my life. And he's like, you need to choose now. He's like, and are you sure, like, entertaining and having these public debates and trying to be open-hearted towards people whose cosmology, like, you don't really believe in anyway? Like, are you sure that's where you want to be spending your time? I mean, you can see why I share that example. It was like the wise one saying, does it matter? Right? So I can have these fantasies and these dreams, and that's part of that, is that like Pisces coming down to earth, okay, about like what I want this weirdness of the world to be doing, what my prayer is for the things that I can't understand to lead to something in a better world, right? It's hard to imagine that when I'm looking at Australia now and right? But I can hold that faith. And this axis says, cool, what do you want to do about it? Right? And so, and part of that for me is like, and it's been part of my impetus of, oh, I'm going to start a school. Because as these axes change, like the bendings go through my third, ninth. And I feel the 3, 6, 9, 12, they're very much about our spiritual learning. Right? The 2, 5, 8, 11, they're a little bit more about our learning through engagement and experience. And so on a worldly level, I think that's what we're talking about here. But again, like, where does it live in your chart? That might be most important. So Ari Moshe, I have this question for you, because one of the other thing that's happening here is the node, as the north node moves towards 0 Aries, one of the astronomical results is that the out of bounds periods for the moon every month. So if you have studied out of boundsness, this is having a declination beyond the tropics, okay, or the tilt angle of the Earth. So as I was saying earlier, like that solstice hill is as far south as the setting sun will get from where I sit, and then it will head north every day until it gets there at the Cancer tropic, and then it will stop and turn around. In fact, tropicos means turnarounds, okay? Solstice, the sun stops. And those are the bounds of the sun. When the moon is out of bounds south, as she will be every month for years and years moving forward, when in late Sag, early Capricorn, the moon will set further south of that hill. Like, it can literally go to places the sun never can. And there are only certain signs hosting the nodes that allow the moon to go out of bounds. That began recently. That begins when the north node is in Gemini. It peaks when the North Node is at 0 degrees tropical Aries. And so then we reach what's called a lunar maximum. Now, many of the ancients celebrated this in building of sacred sites and aligning to these extremes, right? So like the moon will literally then set 5 degrees further south of the tropic point or the north of the other tropic. And so there's this very interesting truth as well, as North Node now moves from Gemini to Taurus, and then from Taurus to Aries and peaking again in a few years. It's like 2024, 2025 zone with North Node moving to the Aries point, when the moon every month will get more and more out of bounds. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to know how you approach out of bounds moon or out of bounds planets in a chart. And have you kind of tuned into what that might mean about these years to come?
I've never worked with it, and it's something that I feel I'll tune into. Yeah, I've never really worked with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this will probably be that
Is
time.
the out of bounds, and so just so I understand the astronomy, is it because in the Capricorn point, for example, that's where the Earth's tilt at 23.5, that's where it's most, that the axis of the Earth is furthest from the ecliptical plane at the Capricorn cancer
Let me
points?
show a picture. I don't have the best pictures in these particular.
Celestial equator is the word I'm looking for.
But this is cool. So I call these like the 2 staves of Hermes, right? And this is like a really important way to like be with the nodes. Let me just put that away for a second, right? Like in so many traditions, we see like, you know, the spine and then the Ida and the Pingala, for example, right? Like the Kundalini snaking about that spinal place, right? And so if you just consider the spine as the ecliptic, and interestingly, the spine is associated with the sun in medical astrology, yeah, the heart and the spine. The moon is snaking about, right? So the moon, while the light has this, the sun has this steadiness, right? The moon is the light that changes, right? And the moon moves so quickly, as we know, and she waxes and she wanes and she goes north and south and all of these truths, right? So I think that image of like Hermes Caduceus staff really speaks to us about this like nodal snaking. But there's another staff of Hermes, which just is the tropical zodiac. So I want you just to kind of compare this image on the left with this image on the right, right? The one on the right we've been looking at, right? It's the nodal picture with the golden ecliptic or zodiac, the sun's course. And then what I call the circle of soul and the moon that snakes above and below, if you will, the sun's path every month, right? The nodes of the Earth-Sun relationship are the equinox points. And why do I say that? Because the tropical zodiac is literally just born, like this is the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac in a nutshell, okay? Like it is born of the planes of day and year. The plane of year is the ecliptic, right? It's Earth orbiting the sun, which we experience as sun orbiting us, yeah? It always passes through the tropics. The plane of the day, which is Earth's daily rotation, right, causing sunrise, sunset, etc., and the movement of the heavens through the houses, is Earth's equator. And so where the plane of day, the equator, and the plane of year, the ecliptic, intersect, these are the equinox points. And where they most diverge, these are the solstice points, yeah? And so you can see the same thing, like the sun crossing like a node, getting to a bending, coming back. Like you can think of literally the Libra point as the south node, and the Capricorn point as the southern bending, and the Aries point is the north node. Do you see how these pictures are similar? I mean, the tropical zodiac is much more extreme because that declination difference, it's called, is 23.5 degrees, where the latitude difference of the moon's path is only 5, right? So now imagine when this northern bending here, square ahead of the north node, is here at 0 Cancer. Right. So when the north node of the moon is at 0 Aries, then the moon, when at 0 Cancer, is not only there, but it's another 5 degrees north of there. And it's literally 5 degrees north of Earth's Tropic of Cancer. When the sun ingresses tropical Cancer, it shines directly above the Tropic of Cancer. That's like a very beautiful thing to know. So that out of boundsness, yeah, I mean, it's profound. It's crazy to see. And it basically, that's like the delineation. That shit is crazy. Like it goes way out. It's just different. It's not going to be contained by society's norms, right? And it's an interesting thing to consider, for example, that North Node in Taurus creates more of an out of bounds picture than North Node in Gemini. That seems counterintuitive. You know what I mean? But maybe it's not so much if we consider the truth that North Node in Aquarius means the bendings, or Taurus is the bendings in Aquarius, or Aquarius Leo. So it's something you'll notice just physically, and I think we will energetically and experientially more. Like, you know, where were we 18.6 years ago in our study of astrology? I was nowhere near it personally, besides that I was a student of life, and of course that is studying astrology. Some of you, my elders, have been studying astrology for a lot longer than I have. Some of you are younger than me, have been studying astrology a lot longer than I have. That's true for Ari Moshe. But 18.5 years ago, like I wasn't anywhere near this stuff. You know what I mean? I was certainly engaged with the weirdness of the lack of truth. I mean, consider that the last time we had this nodal shift was the Iraq War. And you can see, right? And so that's another piece that I would encourage. Actually, let me just show you one more slide. This has become like a really profound part of my work, which is this idea of nodal return windows, and how they link to other phenomena of the Earth and the sun and the moon, namely eclipse cycles and Metonic cycles. I'm just showing now, like for a native, when your nodal returns are and when the nodal reversals are, okay? But this isn't only about our charts, or I mean, or even, yes, it is. Like the South Node most recently moved through my 6th, that's Scorpio, 18.6 years ago, and moved through my 12th 9.3 years ago, right? And so if we look at those periods in our life, those rhythms in our life, there was a cool question that came in, which was like, what happens when you have the nodes transiting your squares to your nodes, right? So we actually then take this axis and turn it into a cross, right? And we can divide this period instead of in half by 4. And it's intriguing. They're really intriguing things to track and see, and you will find amazing openings. I mean, the other piece of this is looking at the world and looking at these great cycles. So if you just rewind the clock 18.5 years, or look on your charts and do a little research around like what was happening on Earth in culture, etc., when the nodes last made this shift, or when the nodes last moved retrograde as they do through the Taurus Scorpio axis, you're going to find a lot to work with, right? So, I mean, I think we want to learn our astrology. This is like really one of the things I'm so excited about, and having school now and community. And like, we got together for a study group last week and just did some research together. And it's like, hey, what kind of job should Capricorn be? And then we took a place where we could like search jobs and do things with Capricorn. And it's like, oh, it's like a little surprising. Like it's not exactly what I would teach. And so maybe I need to shift that a little bit. You know, I think that our commitment to our philosophy is really alive and beautiful, and like learning the truth and learning the language, like that feels really like empowered by the Gemini Sagittarius. Like one of the great gifts of the lockdown, right, is like how many people have come finally to just saying, I'm going to study astrology. Maybe I was called non-essential for something. I don't want to do that anyway. Now I'm going to go do what I want to do, right? Like it's cool how many like just private students I've taken on as a result, and people who have been waiting for some time to have this opportunity to redirect, and I saw it happen. And now, what is it when we get into this Taurus Scorpio? Is it real? So the necessity to like take our astrology and our astrological learnings and see if they work. And we have the great gift, many of us here, not just Ari and myself, like, of sitting again and again with amazing, open-hearted, awakened beings who are on their path, who are dealing with their life, who are authentically healing and feeling and knowing and growing. And you really get to confirm these cosmologies, but it's always difficult to say, wait a second, like, am I just confirming this because I need to confirm it? You know what I mean? And like the ability to expand our astrological awareness through our own researches and to like test ourselves in the way that we cling to expectation, which is the enemy of experience, right? And like the need for self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will, whatever that may be. And when we come into groups and we work together in that way, like we're forced to be honest. And I think that's really important and really beautiful too. Or, you know, just keep it more, I guess, on the Taurus Scorpio side, like when we engage with the need of othership and the needs of the other and learn how to authentically, if we dare, share our own true needs with the other, like that kind of realm, like it just opens a whole nother level of embodied experiential potential for honesty that doesn't happen in the intellectual or philosophical realms alone. And I, you know, for me, that's like the most opportunity, the beautiful opportunity that's available to us with this shift right now. And it's not going to look pretty, but it's the most beautiful thing.
Beautiful. Oh man. Okay, so two things. Just want to speak and then I'll move into the Saturn in Aquarius. I can't emphasize enough the importance and significance of recognizing those nodal points, nodal squares, nodal oppositions, as well as when the transiting nodes will form significant aspects to planets in our chart, or transiting planets will form significant aspects to our nodes. If we understand that the nodes are this essential integration point for the evolutionary journey, nothing happens that doesn't ultimately move through the nodes. Another way of saying that is nothing is real until it's integrated on the emotional level. It has to be integrated on the level of self, to know ourselves in a new way. So those points where, you know, if you have a Leo Aquarius axis, this is an important time for you. Of course, if you have a Scorpio Taurus axis, this is an important time for you. Also, if you're alive on the planet, this is an important time for you. So there's essential evolutionary opportunity, and these are often crisis points, essentially, where we're faced with the apparent dualities of our life, where things feel irreconcilable. I mentioned in the beginning, we just got a piano. I've been putting off the piano thing for a long time. What if we move, you know, finally? But it's a very funny reflection because, yeah, what if we move? Or what if, you know, we find that next home, that next place, and we get the green lights to go? There's something about the Taurus Scorpio axis right now where we are called to live our life. We need to know what do we really care about? What are we willing to invest ourselves in? And also acknowledging we might lose it all, but that's okay, because it's not about the thing. It's about our commitment to living. It's our choice to be engaged with what's most important, because more will always come. So we never need to be too worried about material loss, because it's not about that. It's about our willingness to actually say yes to our life, to really what's most important to us. That's what I deeply feel is an essential theme. And I also want to say too, all of this beautiful astronomy, the more I learn, the more I touch base with an understanding of the ecliptic and the celestial equator, the intersection points between these two planes, the more I have a felt sense and direct understanding of the spiritual dimensions. So much of my work is nodal focused. And to actually understand what the nodes are astronomically, what the ecliptic is, what are the two intersection points and the two deviation points, or the furthest points from the ecliptic. These are such important basic astronomical things to learn. In my course, we study that. We have a whole segment on that and actually haven't spoken to you, but Gemini, if I can get you back again this year. Last year, Gemini helped facilitate the Q&A because I'm an amateur with the astronomy, but I want to teach the basics and I want to bring in the experts because this is such a wonderful and beautiful way of respecting the spiritual knowledge by understanding the basic astronomy. So I just wanted to offer that and just bow to the importance of this kind of dialogue. And of course, the Gemini's work as well.
Yeah,
So
it's my treat, by the way. I mean, it really, that's one of my principal devotions, is just to help astrologers reclaim that astronomical understanding and learn also how to face some of these attacks that we are consistently befuddled with, like the 13th sign thing and da da da. Like, it's just helpful to have the ability to respond, you know, from a intelligence, and I think even more in experience. So yeah, I really hope that, friends, it's tricky because signs and constellations aren't the same thing. Like, as we're starting to learn the sky, it can be in many regards challenging, but you can just learn to see the ecliptic in the sky. What part of my adventure this year is to learn to see the equator. So yeah, I always, if time allows, always want to answer that invitation to come share with astronomy with any astrological learning center, because it's just so true to my own devotion, and I feel it's very true to this kind of Uranus and Taurus time, and the node in Taurus will fortify this. So I very much appreciate that invitation, and the times that you and I've gotten to spend together on Earth or spend together in this way like this have always been enlightening for me. So I'm so glad that we've gotten together in this way. So yeah, speaking of Taurus, Uranus, and the node there, what do you feel about the eventual and coming connection of node Taurus and also with Saturn at the square to the nodes now?
So I just want to show us first what's happening. I fixed the ascendant at Aries, so it's very simple to follow. Again, when we look at the movement of the nodes, we want to pay attention to the conjunctions and aspects in general, but in particular the square, and I would also say the semi-square and sesquiquadrate. Chiron will be forming a semi-square and sesquiquadrate. We're not going to focus on that now, but I am stating it. So as we progress this, let's just look month by month. Already by February 18th, Saturn at 17 degrees. So Saturn is within a 9-degree orb of a square to the nodal axis. And as you keep on following Saturn, 1 month later, it's at 20 degrees, right? 1 month later, it's already past the square. So in the first few months of this year, starting now-ish, Saturn begins to tighten its square to the nodes. And by the time we're in early April, or even late March, it exacts that square. And then the rest of the year really is just separating, but it's going to be an orb for a long time. Saturn moves retrograde in the summer, or I'm sorry, in the winter or summer, depending in June, be more universal, and stays within 3 or 4 degrees for several months. So you go all the way to October, just 5 degrees away. Saturn's beginning to station at 18 degrees and stays within 5 or 6 degrees till November. By the time we're at the end of the year, Saturn finally leaves a square to the nodes pretty much at the very beginning of 2023, right? So except for January of this year, where you can say it's moving into it. And by the way, movement into a square is more pronounced than movement away from a square. Well, they're not more pronounced. It's a buildup of energy. So it's in the field. We can feel there's something unfolding. Whereas movement away from the square, it's alive, but now that's more of an after effect. We're integrating. There's a new phase that we're now moving into. We're at this point moving into this phase. So the energies of this are alive. It's in the collective field. It's in our consciousness. We know something is up this year. So I'll define this, but I'm just wanting to first show you. Likewise, coming back to now, let me just show you Uranus. Uranus by February 13th is at 11. So right now, Uranus is about to move direct in just, I think, a few days from now. In March, it's at 12 degrees. And by the time we get to April, it moves into a 10-degree orb. the rest of the year, Uranus is just super tight with the North Node. Okay, we're in August, they're within a degree or so. And at the very end of the year, and again, because Uranus goes retrograde, and oftentimes the true nodes are very fascinating, they might station and spend a couple months at 1 degree. So we never just make an assumption about how the nodes are going to move, because you see here, they get really close again towards the end of the year. So even into next year, they're still going to be pretty close to each other.
There's an important piece there, which is when we are in eclipse season, nodes
Just look at that.
park. The nodes will move like direct for a week.
Oh, okay.
For a week, and you'll see actually what I call them the retrogrades, right? Because they usually move retrograde, and when the moon comes around, like the moon will change their direction. But the changes in direction when we're in the bendings or the so-called wobbles times, like between eclipse seasons, are very short-lived. So the nodal retrogradation is very consistent. But in eclipse season, and it's too long of a study, but in my own cosmology, it has a lot to do with spirit wanting soul to come home. And there are times like in eclipse season when it basically thinks that it's one. And so the nodes just like park, because they don't really, but they take like 7 steps, or a step forward and a step backwards and a step forward and a step backwards. It's a really brilliant thing to see that, of course, the nodes, which are sun and moon, are completely influenced by where the moon is every month and where the sun is every year.
That's so cool. That's great. It makes a lot of sense, because the nodes have been pretty much at the end of Sagittarius Gemini for a couple months now, and we have been in eclipse season. So that's great. So that's something to pay attention to. They'll stay at the 22-ish degree range for a while. So according to what Gemini just said, at the bends here, Sun is in Leo. This is when the nodes will be moving more quickly. And then again, towards the end of the year, they're going to be stationing pretty close, around 13 degrees or so. Okay. So let's tune into Saturn. When we have a planet square in the node, this is also one of the big teachings that Jeff Green brought forward, and I'm deeply grateful for in evolutionary astrology. It's pointing to a crisis of integration. There's a lot to speak to, which I won't get into. I want to keep it simple just to understand what this symbolizes in the collective right now. Anytime a planet squares a node, it naturally emphasizes the potential tension or duality between that axis. So there's a potential mastery, wisdom, deeper understanding that can be learned and gained via that planet, because it says you have to figure this out. You can think of, with that core planet squaring the nodes, there can be an unresolved tension that results to an ongoing duality or confrontation or conflict between opposites. And there's a tendency to flip-flop between these extremes until the understanding is achieved. Until the essential teaching is harvested and understood, there tends to be a working out. Identity is always going to do that. That's the fun thing about understanding the nature of identity. It's going to always create extremes. Extremes are actually heightened up until and really just before integration. We have to become aware of we have to actually see where we're split, where we're stuck in our own dualities. And so what does this represent here? And we're keeping it fixed at the Aries ascendant so we can archetypally just connect with the Taurus, Scorpio, Aquarius energies without getting other houses involved. Of course, it's going to be different for each person depending on where these houses are in your chart or where these signs are. So let's define Saturn in Aquarius in general. Okay, good. I've someone who's here, I have a session, and this person is okay with pushing out the session a little bit longer so we can take our time here. I'll probably have to say 4 o'clock Pacific would be a good stopping point one way or another for me. So wherever we have Saturn is where we are learning alignment. We're learning to become introspective and reflective of our posturing, our choices, the conditioning. How are we building a life through the choices and the thoughts that we're repeating over and over and over again. Saturn always points to our posture. What's repeated crystallizes a particular stance. Saturn anywhere invites us to become self-aware, self-reflective, so we can make conscious choices with respect to where we want to go, right? What do I want to do? How do I want to live? How do I want to live my life? Where do I want to be? What are my deepest goals? What's most important to me? How can I take responsibility for that? So it's always a long-term process with Saturn. But a necessary part of the Saturn work is really becoming aware of where we are in a seemingly constant struggle with time and space, where we seem to be struggling with basic time-space boundary issues, being able to manage in this physical world in a functional way, root chakra stuff. So we want to not be constantly struggling with those things so that we can actually feel grounded. If you build a building really well and you take your time and you really study and you receive good instruction, you discipline yourself, you don't just rush into it, you'll build a good foundation. And then when you build the house and you live in the house, you're not going to always be worrying about the foundation. And sometimes we've built a life upon a weak foundation, upon shame, repression, conditions and conditionings that aren't natural, that we've learned. And Jeff Green often taught that most of us don't realize how darn conditioned we are. This is just how it has to be. This is the way to do it. But then we're not happy. We look at our life and it's not really what we want. We have to be willing to go back and look at the assumptions. How are these foundations? Is the foundation sound? Do I need to go back and unwind and actually get to the core? Doing a lot of therapy work is a big part of Saturn, right? Going back to our early imprinting, the things we've learned, the conditioning, how we've learned to relate to time-space reality, internalized judgments and shame, things that we may not even realize we're carrying with us. It's often during important Saturn periods, and this year is a Saturn time, big Saturn time. We know we had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. That's big Saturn time. Saturn squaring Uranus this last year. Yes, but when you have Saturn squaring the nodes, it hits home. This is the year of psychosomatic therapy. This is the year of astrology. This is the year of deeper soul counseling. We'll jump into that in a moment. So this unraveling is a really big part of the Saturn, so that we don't just move forward to build the new without really becoming aware of the patterns and creating new ones. It's deep and thorough work, and there's joy. There's joy and there's peace for all of us as we really take the time to pause and look at what's actually happening inside. What do we need to attend to? And we don't graduate until we do it. I often equate Saturn work with just the way in which throughout life we'll graduate. We'll graduate high school, we'll go to college, and different life phases. We'll repeat the same circumstantial realities in time and space for as long as is needed, so that we can really learn how to meet it consciously and responsibly with self-authority. Then we learn, we get it grounded, and then we can move on and it's stable. So Saturn in Aquarius speaks to how we are structuring our lives with respect to our essential individuality. What is it like for me to be a human being, to be myself, to be true to myself, and to be associating and being a part of community with other people? Are there ways in which I've suppressed my own essential individuality just so I could belong, just so I can fit in, so I can be a part of the treehouse club and not be ridiculed by my friends? How much of my life, here's the introspective question, right? How much of my life has been a suppression of myself because I don't want to be excommunicated, judged, kicked out, ridiculed. I don't want to be different. I don't want to be othered. How much of my life have I been afraid of really looking at myself, of really embracing my own joy? Or how have I been kind of standing in the bleachers and ridiculing others for being different, but actually closing my heart, keeping myself protected? These are some of the questions because we're called upon to live a life that feels meaningful. Aquarius is community. It's connection. We're all meeting on Zoom. That's all we've been doing for a while. And this Aquarian dynamic really asks us to think, what is it like to live here as a community? How do we want to live our life? Do we want to live our life on Zoom? Where are we integrating ourselves with other people in meaningful ways? What is our vision of community? Now, when we're integrating this with a Scorpio-Taurus axis, we're looking at the potential of a lot of trauma emerging. So there are two examples of this. And I want to try to first highlight the nature of the tension that emerges in, and I'll be giving more videos on this on my YouTube channel as well, I feel, in coming weeks. The tension of the square, and then also just where some of the teachings are. An analogy that I like to give that fits this very well is, it's COVID time. You've always wanted to study astrology, but the members of your church were going to ridicule you and, make fun of you. Whenever you brought it up, you were told that's the work of the devil. So you finally start studying astrology and you're a part of a community. Now, are you going to build your training? Are you going to build a website, right? Are you going to talk to your friends about what you do? Or are you going to kind of just pretend to go along? This is the Scorpio-Taurus tension, because the issue here, Taurus relative to Aquarius, is I want to survive. In that past life, when I spoke about astrology, or when I, looked through the telescope and I realized that, the sun maybe is the center of the solar system, I was hung. I was killed. Scorpio, Aquarius, right? The crisis, the tension, the trauma here is being burned at the stake, being betrayed, being told you're not included. Core psychological abandonment and rejection. So then Taurus, I want to stay safe. I'm going to dissociate. I want to survive. I want stability. I want continuity. I don't want to stir shit up. So I'm just going to keep the status quo. But then what happens? Oh, I need more. I'm not sharing the depth of connection and intimacy and sharing and realness that I'm craving. So we're going to be drawn outward to new experiences, new relationship, new community. Let me try doing this thing. And when we jump into that Scorpio dimension, we might find ourselves flooded with that fear. What am I losing here? What am I going to break up? Saturn in Aquarius, I'm so afraid of the rejection, of the judgment, of being kicked out, of not belonging, of not being understood, of being an outsider. And so there are two teachings here. The Scorpio side of it says there is content to deal with here. We have to be willing to die. We have to be willing to face the consequences of being ourselves, of walking our soul path. We can't subdue our individuality for the sake of survival, because then we're not living. And to do that means Aquarius, Saturn, what are we developing? We're learning how to remain detached. We're learning how to remain as an observer, to not get so invested in the drama. So cultivating the ability to work with the psychic content that's emerging, to witness it, and not get stuck in trauma. That's again why I feel like a lot of therapy work and psychosomatic practices and anything that helps us deepen our objective understanding of the inner dynamics that are manifesting now is really helpful during this time. Because certain decisions and choices or things that are manifesting in the field might feel very scary. Right? This can be other people. Changes are happening in our life. I want to hold on. I don't want change. No, keep it this way. I want to possess. So we need to be able to deal with the reality of change, whether it's coming seemingly from the inside or outside, and cultivate a ground of, okay, what's coming up? Embrace it, embrace it, embrace it. Where is the freedom and the liberation ultimately emerging? Because what happens when we're not afraid to be ourselves, there might be a reorganizational process that occurs. There might be a process of letting go of control, facing some of our deepest fears and wounds and traumas of abandonment, fear, rejection, but we allow everything and everyone to fall into place in harmony. That's what Aquarius is. the vision of community and togetherness and giving and sharing, where we can survive and live together in a much better way. It's limited according to the extent to which we're holding on to the status quo, as dysfunctional as it might be. Okay, so then the Taurus side of it says here, don't dissociate just for the sake of survival, but it says you have to learn how to stay in your body. Learn to stay grounded, stay healthy, keep on tending your garden, because other people might be different than you, right? That says fundamentally the gift of the Taurus Aquarius is, I'm going to do my own thing regardless. I know how I want to live. It doesn't matter if no one else around me is doing that. I can't be constantly looking on the outside, because then whether I'm accepted or not will disrupt my sense of balance. I'll constantly feel like I'm being betrayed or rejected or abandoned. I need to be true to myself and enjoy myself. That's the square of enjoyment, Aquarius, Taurus. Oh, this is fun. I enjoy. Yes, no one grows gardens this way. No one does things this way. No one's ever thought of this before. What is it like to live here as a human being when we're just really willing to look inside first and not be afraid of what we find? And to know that the nature of life is inclusion and acceptance. Now, some of the things that can really strengthen, that's so important as a blessing and a prayer to really be appreciative of during this time, are the people that we can bear our soul to. Right? To look at the relationships in our life, the friends, the community that are just there. They're not needing us to be other than what we are, and we don't need them to be other than what they are. And I would invite at this time to really see where we may not be appreciating that, or where there's a calling to understand the importance of having that ground of connection with one another. So we can feel like, I can really just be here. I'm not losing everything. There's a ground of love and sharing and stability. And here, we're walking each other home. And that's the greater truth. We're all walking each other home. The possibility of there being so much fear, to know that there's love, there's community, there's healthy relationships, there are people to work with, there are healthy, wonderful projects to be working with, and to go slow. That's one of the biggest teachings. And so this square says so much of the content that's arising, it's not necessary. This is an important piece, that it's all happening in the outer world. Like, I have to engage. I have to pursue this desire. I have to break up the status quo and do this thing, or get up on church and get up on the pews and say, hey, everyone, I'm an astrologer. Like, it doesn't have to be intense. It doesn't have to be extreme. We don't have to break every wall to pursue everything that we think we need. So much of this can just be arising inside. And we get to be wise. What does it look like to move through this life when I know I have what I need? When I'm supported, I'm grounded, and everything's okay right now. What's necessary? What's the next step? So that we're not creating extra noise. There can be an immediacy, and there's so much to say, and I'll simplify and I'll keep it here for now. Aquarius does correspond to trauma itself. And so we can see life and be projecting all kinds of unresolved pieces from the past. And it can seem more real, more serious, more imminent, more threatening than it actually is. And so as we do our inner work and we're supported in these ways, to see how safe it is to remain the ground of witness, to cultivate a greater capacity for observation, so that our choices and our practices, what we're building, what we're doing long term, can be informed by a sense of wisdom and self-authority. And this is really where I feel during this square time, this is the year where there's so, like, the community you wanted, the garden you want to grow, the projects you wanted to get involved in. It's like our souls are calling for more depth, more intimacy, more realness, more connection with people, bodies, land, experience, life. That's what it's calling for. And it's here for us. And the inner work is sort of this courting, this relationship to all that it is that we really feel is right for us. So I'll keep that there, and just to honor Uranus on the North Node, right? Uranus accelerates the evolutionary process. It speeds it up. Anything on the North Node is sort of like a green light to evolutionary growth via that planetary function. Doesn't mean it's easy, but this can basically say there's if it's a really good movie and things seem normal for the first 10 minutes, you know something's going to happen. Something Uranian's going to happen, because where things are going and where the movie's about to go is not where you think it's going. And I like to say that Uranian experiences are only shocks and surprises because of Saturn, because we're conditioned, because we're expecting things to be the same according to our conditioning. So there's a possibility to evolve and to see the greater destiny and potential and future that emerges from really being true to ourselves. It can be a very profound year where I would pretty boldly say it's not going to go the way we think it will. A lot of healing though. And the more we can do it together, the better. So I'll end this piece again with a little share and plug for our courses. Many of you know about this, the training program that I'm doing, but I invite everyone to check it out, my website, the Essentials course, and as well as a full year training program. It's basically training in heart and soul centered astrology. It's community. There's a self-study component. There's a community component. And this is one of the ways in which I get to share this medicine, these teachings that really point us back to the spiritual journey, back to our own soul evolution. And I just feel it's very, very healing to be sharing it, to be doing this inner work in the context of a group of people that are also doing this. It's very enriching. So that ends my plug, of course. And for those who don't know Gemini's work, please check out his work as well. But this is the year where we have to really appreciate and attune to, where am I called to come together? For real. Where am I called to collaborate? Where am I called to let go of the isolation and appreciate where the friends and community and resonance is, because that's what's most important.
I couldn't agree more. And yeah, Ari, I love that, how close you are to me physically as well. And I'm looking forward to spending more time and getting our families together.
Yeah,
Like this
well.
idea of being together. I'm really stoked this year to be teaching at the OPA conference and speaking at the ESAR conference, and finally connecting in with folks on the physical again. And just encourage that for people more and more, right? Like that physical connection is something that we need to maintain to stay human and keep humanity human, despite these times of so much, like, you know, forced separation. Yeah, I want to share, I put in the chat, geminibrett.com/courses. I'll just show you what happens if you go there. At my site, there's like a pop-up, thanks to my beloved Anna, who has magic like that. But at the courses page, it's just a place to sign up for the waiting list. And I highly recommend you do, if you have time, to check out a bunch of cool classes, because that will bring you after a workout. By the way, you'll get a confirmation email. And then after you confirm that, you'll get sent a link and also a password to get in here. And you'll have access for 33 days to, there's like a whole bunch of classes that are already up. I'm making this whole Capricorn month available for free. And there's a teaching actually this Sunday on really essential golden astronomy. So what is a day? What is a year? How does it show up in the chart? What is the great year? I'm teaching a monthly class on a sign and a monthly class on an associated kind of fundamental topic in this golden year, but also a monthly class on a sacred geometry and number magic topic. These are sister sciences to astrology. And practices like draw 108 circles, and practices like build a sundial and use it and learn to do some shadow work. So if you jump in here, you'll also find some bonus classes. I just recorded a 2-hour class on magical time and planetary hours and days and nights. This transmission from Ari and myself today will eventually find its way there. I just put up a whole bit.
Oh, it's already there.
The, Venus synodic cycle. Yeah, well, it used to be a link, and soon it will be a video. And you can just check out this curriculum. My intention, first of all, I'm fond of saying things like there are many ways to pet the cosmic cat, and as long as it purrs, I know that my teaching and Ari's teaching will be complementary. My intention really is I'm helping students engage with where to enter a chart, and that is not to like contradict other learnings that they have, but support. That's the intention anyway. I just want to share a couple interesting bits of intrigue astrologically, astronomically before we split. Here's now. And what I'll show you is because Saturn is squaring the nodes, and let me just show you a couple charts. Like here is the Saturn nodal square. The one exact alignment is April 11th, 2022. It's a pretty cool thing to see that as Saturn is square the nodes, the Jupiter Neptune conjunction, it's like literally at the same time, as you can see, is on a wedge to the nodes. So trine south node and sextile north node. That's a huge opportunity for deep contemplations right there. Go. Like enjoy yourself. And Ari, I'd love to get together like later in the year and speak about some of these things and some of the eclipses that are happening. But I love that because like Ari, I'm a musician and I experience astrology musically in many ways and teach astrology musically. But there's in music, we very intentionally build structures of tension so that the release is more beautiful. And I always engage with charts in that regard. Like when I see a very strong and sometimes tense square like that, like where's the outlet? Where does it resolve? And it's really beautiful to see this Pisces, Jupiter, Neptune conjunction as a place for kind of the nodes to go and feel harmony despite the challenge of Saturn on the square. As you can see during the Saturn exact square with the nodes, it's actually a full-on cross, right? With the moon and Leo. So that's like an amazing thing to see. I'll show you the chart for the Uranus node conjunction. And Mars is in the house, right? And again, like look at the cross because of Mercury or the sun, right? So we'll get our Sun-Saturn opposition. That's the last thing I'll bring you to. If we look at now, there's this interesting truth that because Saturn is square the nodes, every month when moon comes along to conjoin Saturn, like here's the next, it's February 1st. This obviously won't be seen. It's the Aquarius new moon will conjoin Saturn, right? Squaring the nodes. And so moon will be under the beams. This, by the way, is as far from an eclipse as you can get because moon is not meeting sun near the crossing points, but as far, from those crossing points as we get, right? That's the truth of the bendings. But I'll show you this astronomical parameter called latitude, right? Which is how far north or south of the ecliptic, and the moon gets about 5 degrees away when she's square the nodes at her bendings. So you see just right here, the second line down, celestial latitude, and at this moon Saturn conjunction, 5 degrees south. Okay, now we won't see that, but let me show you the next one. Now it's going to be a sign away from the sun at the time. And the next time, about a month later, it'll be 2 signs away from the sun, right? So it's going to get more and more visible in the sky, these moon-Saturn conjunctions. And because Saturn is currently at the place square the nodes, every time moon comes by, she's going to conjoin Saturn, but kind of also not conjoin Saturn. So the one that I want to show you, like the one that will be most visible in the sky is when we get to sun opposite Saturn, which happens every 378 days. The one coming up is August 14th of this year. And then I'm just going to rewind the clock and show when moon conjoins Saturn shortly before that. And I'll give you an astronomical image of this. So this is August 11th or August 12th, depending on where you live. And the reason why I do this when sun is opposite Saturn, because that means like a full moon, Saturn's going to rise at sunset and just dominate the night, right? So it's a good opportunity if clouds allow, northern hemisphere, a good time in that regard too, to go out and see this thing. But every month after we get past this Aquarius new moon time, this annual or monthly event of moon conjoined Saturn will become visible and then more and more visible. And, again, it's like that picture I had taken of moon and Jupiter, right? Like not every conjunction is created equally. So if you've studied like astrological magic, for example, like, or electional astrology from a traditional point of view, one of the just don't do it rules is moon Saturn. It's just like, just don't do it. Now, whether we should participate by that rule or that structure or that boundary, I mean, I think this is a really good time for us to be looking at our rules and perhaps rewriting our rules, right? But there's also this cool truth of like, well, is Moon really conjunct Saturn? Because when you go out there and see it with your eyes, it's like there's Saturn, there's Moon down there. And there's something I think that's kind of well, I mean, Koa, my partner's son, would just call it sneaker. It's like, oh, Moon is just kind of sneaking by, right? So maybe a little bit less constrained by what Saturn believes Aquarius is meant to be, and Moon bringing the opportunity for a little bit more heart and soul and feeling to that place, which of course could not be more necessary. And that's a place where I think, or I know I have so much admiration for Ari, that he is a heart-centered astrologer and human being. And this matters more and more. I am more and more drawn to the traditional side of our craft, but I want to be in that place personally with like modern sensibility. So anyway, I'm really glad that we got to spend some time together today and that y'all were able to come and join us. If this was an introduction for you to Ari Moshe's work, you're welcome. And I'm very honored by the opportunity also to speak to some of these amazing beings in your school and to connect with all astrologers and students of astrology. The world is in a strange way and needs solid terrestrial translation of the celestial conversation more than ever before. So I'm so glad to see heart-centered beings coming to this work. And I hope you will choose to help others feel and heal and know and grow more and more, because the world needs you now.
Thank you for joining, everyone.